There's a petition to reinstate Sean McDermott as the head coach of the Buffalo Bills. Your decision to sign it has to be based on the answer to a question. Did McDermott take the Bills as far as they could go? Or did the Bills take McDermott as far as he could go? We're going to answer it today on the Ralph Rant. Let's go.
Welcome to the Ralph Rant, your source for hard-hitting Buffalo Bills takes. Now, here's your host of the Ralph Rant, that veteran watcher of generations of Bills teams, the prophet who predicted Josh Allen's greatness, that opinionated so-and-so you've walked out on parties because of, the Ralph.
Welcome to the Ralph Rant. I am your host, the Ralph. Thank you ever so much for being here. On today's show, we continue our coverage of the Bills head coach situation. Certainly the Bills are interviewing candidates as we speak, but we're also going to concentrate a little bit more on the Sean McDermott situation. I've got some more thoughts that have developed over the week since I put out my first video on the situation. Now, before we get into the topics today, I want to thank everyone who has supported this channel since it got started back in May. Close to 1,600 subscribers. I never dreamed we would get to that point by this time, so very much appreciated. Thank you for everyone who comes into the live streams. I feel like I've got a bunch of new friends that show up there all the time, so that's been great. And indeed, if you are new to the channel today, please take the nanosecond required to hit the subscribe button and become part of the Ralph Rant. Go ahead and like the video, share if you care, and certainly leave your comments because they empower this channel. Now, what are we going to talk about today? Well, I'm going to start off with Sean McDermott's ceiling, and I've got some thoughts on that I really haven't heard expressed elsewhere, and I think they bear repeating. And then we're going to talk about what I thought was a delightfully truthful press conference the other day that is considered by others to be a PR disaster. Who cares? Then we're going to move on to what I'm referring to as the quarterback halo that is perhaps above the head of Sean McDermott, and we've got to take a look at that. And then I've got a fill-in-the-blank segment. The new head coach must fill in the blank, and I've got a number of ideas to fill in that blank. And then finally, we will talk about what I believe Josh Allen really needs in terms of a head coach coming into this team, what it needs to look like, what it needs to feel like. And we'll get into all of those right now, so let's blow the horn and go. When we talk about floor or ceiling in terms to describe an NFL player or a team or a coach, we use them pretty freely because the terms are subjective. There are no stats associated with them. You have to kind of rein in what you're talking about and be honest with yourself when you're talking about floor or ceiling. For example, if I put out a video that predicts Rex Ryan is the next coach of the Bills and it gets 3 or 4 views, that's no more the floor of my views than would be a video that correctly predicts the next head coach and I publish it days before the announcement and say that gets 100,000 views. That wouldn't be a ceiling either. It's what consistently happens. So when we look at Sean McDermott, and you take a look at what consistently happens, the ceiling is pretty high. That's why there's a petition out there calling for his reinstatement as head coach. I mean, after all, McDermott comes in and breaks the playoff drought his first season. It's not a fluke because he's there then 7 of the next 8 seasons. The only one he missed was Josh Allen's rookie year. And you talk about a record, well, he's the second winningest head coach in Bills history. Behind Marv Levy with 112 wins, McDermott has 85. He passed Chuck Knox with Knox's 80 this past season. Or how about winning percentage? Well, McDermott has the highest winning percentage of any coach in Bills history with a .648. And my goodness, since 2020, .710, 71 out of 100 games on average won. It's a remarkable number, and it demonstrates that high ceiling. But if you're going to talk about things that are consistent, we also have to look about other things that have happened regularly, which are the dumb losses during the season, the lull the Bills fall into, losing to teams they should never have lost to, or missing out on the number 1 seed because of some silly loss during the season. Look at Terry's numbers of 5, 2, 2, 2, 3, 6. The Bills seeding over the last 6 playoff tournaments. And then look at the other things with McDermott. It is those playoff losses that got him fired, but the similarity of them, all of them chaotic endings, many of them situations where the defense could not get a stop, and McDermott's the defensive head coach. The team has played tight at times. I think teams often take on the personality of their head coach. And McDermott can be described as having been a little bit rigid, a little bit tight. I mean, he comes in as a first-time head coach to the Bills. You know he's trying hard to get it right. He becomes very, very stringent in how he assesses things. Very meticulous, detail-oriented, the process. So it's an unusual situation, but I think there's a decent, consistent definition that his ceiling was somewhere in the middle of the playoffs. And Terry Pegula decided that and decided to relieve McDermott of his duties. And just like a lot of those chaotic playoff endings, the ending of McDermott's career as the Bills head coach was also chaotic. I believe that McDermott reached his ceiling and the Bills couldn't go any farther. I do not believe this was a case of he took this Bills team as far as this Bills team could go. It was about a year ago I heard this spoof audio on WGR. It was created by AI, obviously, and it was supposed to be Terry Pegula at a press conference talking about either the Bills or the Sabres, and he was being blunt and very honest in how they'd created this, and it was funny as hell because it's how you wish an owner would really be, being honest about the team. So when that actually happened at the press conference earlier this week, I don't know why everyone is calling it a PR disaster for the Bills. Like players won't want to come there because of that. Come on, give me a break. But everybody's up in arms about Terry Pegula being honest. He was honest about what happened in the locker room, what he saw, why he decided to fire McDermott. He was honest about what he had seen in earlier playoff games, those losses and happening. He looked honest. He looked like he was really fed up. And then, of course, he was honest about Keon Coleman. And perhaps he shouldn't have said it. Perhaps he wasn't prepared well enough. Or perhaps he absolutely deliberately said it. Because the one thing that him saying it does for me is it tells me what he said is true. That the coaches wanted Keon Coleman. And of course, if you believe that, then that opens up this whole question about the relationship between McDermott and Beane and how it went over the 9 years. I mean, they kind of came from the same place. They showed up here, had some pretty great early success, and you have to admit that it was like a great band that got off the ground with a number of great albums. But even the Beatles ended up hating each other after 9 years, and that's what this has been. And I think a lot of it comes down to player selection. Sean McDermott always struck me as the CEO of the Bills. He was the boss. The boss. He did not work for Brandon Beane. And I think he made calls on who was selected as players. And I think we saw that that was the truth based on what Terry Pegula said. But then when we look at some of it more closely, perhaps they wanted Kaiir Elam, and McDermott couldn't make it work with him, and Beane gets placed blame for the first-round pick of Elam, or the selection of Keon and trading out of the first round, that perhaps not being what Beane wanted to do. And then this season, again, with the heavy defensive draft, now he admitted that that was the problem with the team. But maybe he wanted a wide receiver. Maybe that's why he did get so angry at WGR on the interview, or he got so defensive in the press conference. Maybe that's exactly why he did not want to give up a high draft pick, surrendering another one to perhaps what coaching wanted in order to save McDermott's job by getting Jalen Waddle from the Dolphins, which would have cost the Bills their 2026 first-round pick. So yes, the Beatles broke up, and McDermott and Beane have broken up. And that's what occurred here. The result in Denver perhaps is what actually pushed Terry Pegula to actually saying the words, but this had been developing for a while, I believe. I like Sean McDermott, and of course he will go down as one of the greatest head coaches in Bills history. That's already a done deal. But no, I won't sign the petition to have him reinstated. And why? Well, I've been clear about that much of the season. How things go on the sideline, there's no attitude, no coaches getting in players' faces. Josh Allen with the deer in the headlights look, both coordinators up in the booth. And McDermott just being his tight, rigid self. Then, of course, there's the categorical defensive failures in these playoff games. They all have names, 13 seconds, the catch, wide right. And in most cases, the Bills have a lead late in those games that McDermott's defense cannot protect. But then, aside from the playoffs, there's just the thing that it's a known fact that McDermott's defense is very, very complex, which is great. That resulted in a number 2, I believe, pass defense rating in the league this season. That's awesome. But it's complex. And because it's complex and because you don't have Hyde and Poyer back there as an experienced tandem for year after year, it's tougher for young guys to learn. Look at how long it took Cole Bishop to get there. Or how some of the other young guys have struggled. Or how Kaiir Elam got wrecked. Or how you just don't see young players out on the field with the Bills a lot because McDermott is afraid to play them. And especially on defense, where it's complex and he doesn't believe young players can excel. And so what do you end up doing? Well, guys are getting injured all the time. Who knows why that is? But you have to end up bringing in old retreads that have been on the team before because they know the songs. And not because they're great players. That's why I won't sign that petition. But on the other hand, people will come back and say, well, hey, you yourself said McDermott may be the greatest in history of the Bills thus far. wins, winning percentage, the run of going to the playoffs? Yes, indeed. But let's not forget that the year after McDermott arrived, Josh Allen arrived. This is what I'm talking about with the quarterback halo. McDermott looks great. His wins look great. His penetration into the playoffs looks great. But of course, he had Josh Allen as the quarterback for all of that. And you could say, well, he might still be great without Josh Allen. Well, that's kind of difficult to say when Bill Belichick is considered not great without Tom Brady. You can't have it both ways. Belichick was wearing that quarterback halo, and he's a better coach than McDermott. And it wasn't his first rodeo, by the way, when he was head coach of the Patriots. So yes, McDermott is wearing the quarterback halo, and when he doesn't have a hat on, it shines pretty brightly on the dome. Okay, now we're on to the segment, fill in the blanks to this statement: the next head coach must. Well, the first must was filled in by Brandon Beane himself when he said the next head coach must be the CEO. And I'm assuming he means coming in and being the CEO in the same sense that Sean McDermott was, which McDermott, for everything else we've talked about, was actually quite good at in terms of being the CEO of the team, I think, as he developed through the years he was there. So for whatever that means to Brandon Beane, CEO is one of the musts. Well, another must might be that this coach has head coaching experience, because I don't know if they envision a guy being able to come in and be the CEO if this is his first rodeo at being an NFL head coach. Now, there might be an exception to that with one of the talented offensive minds they're talking to that are younger guys that have no head coaching experience. But you never know. Maybe you're finding another Sean McVay or another Mike Shanahan, for that matter. So that's a possibility. What are our next attempts at filling in the blanks? Well, the head coach must have presence, I believe. For whomever he is, this is an established team that doesn't need to be knocked down and rebuilt from the bottom up in terms of it being a team. Perhaps with scheme, of course, but in terms of it being a team that's together. So this next head coach is going to have the right kind of presence to come in and feel that and deal with that and not overdo it and not underdo it, because it's a particular situation. And then, of course, the next head coach, I believe, must have an offensive background. We've never had that with Josh Allen as quarterback. We've looked at other teams that have offensive minds and what they've been able to do, not only with the quarterback, but with the offense overall. So I think that's a must. And the other reason it is a must is because if you bring in an offensive coordinator with, say, another defensive head coach, say they hire Anthony Weaver, but then what happens if that offensive coordinator benefits from having Josh Allen as a quarterback and looks great and gets himself whisked off to another head coaching job? I'd rather we just have that intellectual capital on the offensive side with the head coach himself, so there's not a danger of losing that. But there's one other must for the head coach, and it's such a must that I've left it for the last segment. So this final segment is almost a continuation of the last because it is another head coach must. And this one has to do with Josh Allen, what Josh Allen really needs. Because of all of the requirements for the Bills' new head coach, this far outweighs all the rest. We know Josh Allen is the best player in the NFL. He's probably the best player ever in the NFL. Extremely unusual talent. Just unbelievable. The eye test, the statistical test, it's all there. But if we look really closely, when is Josh Allen really at his very, very best? It's when he's creating. Some people call it improvising. I don't prefer that term. It is when he is on the field creating. And with his physical gifts and his presence, he's able to create like no one else. So you need to have an offensive mind that comes into this team that can somehow set up a situation where Josh Allen is largely creating out on the field. It'll certainly be set within a given scheme with certain parameters how they want to operate, but within that, there needs to be the ability for Josh to create on plays. And in order to do that really effectively, he needs to be able to be sure of having a layup on each and every play. Cole Beasley used to offer that. But the offense has to be set up. Josh Allen is very, very special. It makes sense that a very, very special offense ought to be what he is running in order to enable him to be his very best. You're not going to achieve that with a defensive head coach or some offensive coordinator that's trying to make a name for themselves rather than actually working with and developing what's right in front of him. And that is this very special player that is Josh Allen, that is not a technician. He's an artist on the field. And whoever comes in and coaches this team has to recognize that first and foremost, because everything else will lead from that. And then simplify the defense some, get some young guys out playing, loosen up a little bit, and go win a few Super Bowls. The window's not closed. In fact, it might be just opening if this turns out like it could. So thanks again for watching. I appreciate your comments on the show. Give it a like. And of course, again, if you are new to the channel, go ahead and hit that subscribe button. Become part of the Ralph Rant. And then you can be with us here every time we're at the end. We always say, be good, do good, God bless, and go Bills. I am the Ralph, and this is the Ralph Rant. Out.